She had been gone for hours, maybe a whole day. But the person who was supposed to care for her waited until it was too late. Her name was Delilah Villegas. She had autism. She never spoke a word. But she was alive. She was here. And now she was gone. No bed. No pillow. No warmth. Just the floor beneath her fragile body. A body covered in bruises, sores, and bones that had started to show through her skin. She had suffered, and she had suffered for a long time. Her mother, Canales, called 911. She said Delilah had just eaten. She said her daughter was breathing. But the truth? The truth was much worse. Why did no one help Delilah? Why was she left to die alone, in the one place that should have been safe? This is the story of Delilah Villegas, the girl who was forgotten. Welcome to True Crime Stories videos. I welcome you, my viewers, and most especially my subscribers, for your support as we keep improving and bringing you daily told and untold true crime stories. Please don't forget to subscribe to this channel. The information presented in this video is based on publicly available data and sources. The purpose of this content is to raise awareness about the issues and events that are happening around the world. While we strive to provide accurate information, we may not always capture the exact details of an event. If you were present at the event or have first-hand knowledge, we encourage you to share your perspective and engage in a constructive dialogue. Our goal is to spark meaningful conversations and raise awareness, not to spread misinformation. The front door creaked open and the smell poured out. Thick, suffocating. A smell no one should ever get used to. But inside that house, it had become normal. First responders stepped in, their boots sticking to the floor. The air was stale, the walls stained. And then, in the back room, they found her. Delilah Villegas, 19 years old, curled up on the concrete as if she had tried to make herself disappear. Her body was still. Her skin was thin, stretched over bones that looked too fragile to hold her up. Open sores covered her. Infected. Some had eaten through to the bone. Her body told a story of pain, a slow kind of suffering that no one had stopped. But the floor told another story. Beneath her, a dark outline, her body imprinted into the concrete. A stain that wouldn't fade. She hadn't just died here. She had lived here. If you could call it living. One of the paramedics reached out, then hesitated. His breath hitched. A police officer turned away, jaw clenched. They had seen terrible things before. But this was something different. And then a voice broke through the silence. She was breathing before you got here. Canales stood in the doorway, arms wrapped around herself. No tears. No panic. Just those words. Cold. Flat. She said Delilah had just eaten. That she was fine. That she had been alive when she called for help. But Delilah's body had its own truth. The paramedics didn't need to check. They already knew. The stiffness. The cold. The way her body had settled into the floor. This wasn't fresh. This wasn't new. She had been gone for hours. Maybe longer. One of the officers turned to Crystal. His voice was careful. Too careful. When was the last time you saw her move? She hesitated. Her lips parted, but no words came out. The silence stretched. And then, the first lie. She was fine this morning. But everyone in that room already knew the truth. The question started the moment they stepped outside. The air was cold, but Canales barely shivered. She stood there, arms crossed, her eyes darting between the officers. She didn't cry. She didn't beg. She just waited. Tell us what happened, one officer said. Crystal shifted her weight. Her voice was steady. Too steady. She was fine this morning. She ate some crackers. Then she stopped breathing. But they had just come from that room. The body. The sores. The smell. Nothing about Delilah had been fine for a very long time. When was the last time she saw a doctor? Another officer asked. Crystal hesitated. Her fingers curled into her sleeves. She didn't like doctors. She would get upset. So, it's been a while. How long is a while? Another pause. Longer this time. Then, barely above a whisper, 2021. The officers exchanged looks. It was 2024. 3 years. 3 years without a checkup. No hospital visits. No records of medicine or care. Nothing. One of the paramedics turned away, shaking his head. They had seen neglect before. But this was something worse. Then came another question. When was the last time someone else saw her? Crystal's lips parted, but no words came out. Family? Friends? Anyone? She glanced toward the house. My mother. My sister. They've been here. But when investigators called them, the story was different. I haven't seen Delilah in months, one family member said. Maybe a year, said another. The officers pressed further. Did you ever check on her? Did you know she was sick? And that's when the answers started to crumble. Some family members said they thought she was fine. Others admitted they had concerns but never pushed. Crystal said she was taking care of it, one relative mumbled. I thought she was handling it. But Delilah had wasted away inside that house. And no one had stopped it. Now the question wasn't just about neglect. It was something deeper. Something worse. Had Crystal Canales truly let this happen, or had she done something even darker? Crystal Canales sat across from detectives, her hands folded in her lap. Her voice was calm, almost rehearsed. I tried, she said. I really did. But Delilah wouldn't let me. She explained that Delilah would fight, scream, even become violent when she tried to take her to a doctor. She didn't like hospitals. She didn't like people touching her. She would hurt herself. I thought I was doing what was best. But the officers weren't buying it. Delilah was nonverbal, yes. She had autism, yes. But nothing in her medical history suggested she had ever been violent. And if Crystal was so worried about her daughter's reactions, why hadn't she asked for help? That's when detectives started digging deeper. Records showed the last documented emergency call to that house had been nearly 3 years ago. 3 years. No hospital visits. No doctor's appointments. No wellness checks. Nothing. And when they looked at Delilah's medical records, one thing was clear. She wasn't dying from an illness. She wasn't suffering from a condition no one could fix. She had been starved. Days without food. Weeks. Maybe longer. Her body had been shutting down slowly. The sores. The weakness. The bones pressing through her skin. It wasn't just neglect. It was something worse. And all the while, Crystal had been there. Watching. Ignoring. Letting it happen. But why? Why would a mother let her own child waste away? Was it truly fear, or was there another reason Crystal had kept Delilah locked away for so long? The medical examiner's report was worse than anyone expected. Delilah Villegas weighed just 50 pounds when they found her. 19 years old, but barely the size of a child. Her body had been eating itself to survive. Her muscles had wasted away. The sores on her skin weren't from an injury. They were from months, maybe years, of lying in the same spot, too weak to move. And the most chilling detail? The forensic timeline. Delilah hadn't passed away that morning. Not the night before either. The experts agreed, she had likely been dead for a full day before Crystal Canales ever picked up the phone. Detectives needed answers. What kind of mother lets her child suffer like this? Was Crystal overwhelmed? Was she struggling? Or was this something darker? They turned to the people who might have seen the warning signs, Crystal's neighbors. I didn't even know she had a daughter, one neighbor admitted. I've lived here for 5 years. Never saw the girl. Not once. Another recalled hearing noises at night. Soft thuds. Whimpers. But when they asked Crystal about it, she always had an excuse. Oh, she's just throwing a fit, she would say. You know how kids are. Except Delilah wasn't a child throwing a fit. She was starving. Suffering. And no one had stopped to ask why. Detectives started piecing together a timeline, a slow, painful unraveling of a life trapped behind closed doors. In 2021, Delilah was still seen in public. A doctor's visit. A grocery store trip. A glimpse of her in the backyard. In 2022, the sightings stopped. No more school records. No medical checkups. No outside help. By 2023, it was like she had disappeared completely. No one had seen her. No one had spoken to her. And inside that house, Delilah had been dying inch by inch while the world kept moving outside. Now there was no doubt. This wasn't just neglect. This was something worse. But detectives still had one question left to answer. Why? The truth was out. There was no more denying it. No more excuses. No more lies. On a quiet afternoon, police arrived at Crystal Canales' home, not for questions this time but for an arrest. She barely reacted as they placed the handcuffs around her wrists. No tears. No shock. Just silence. She was charged with serious bodily injury to a disabled person. A charge that could put her behind bars for years. Maybe even for life. But was it enough? The community didn't think so. Neighbors stood outside watching as police led Crystal away. Some shook their heads. Others whispered to each other. But one woman, a mother herself, couldn't hold back. "That poor girl," she said, her voice breaking. "She didn't deserve this." People demanded justice. They wanted answers. How had Delilah's suffering gone unnoticed for so long? Why had no one stepped in? And then there was the most painful question of all. Did Delilah know? Did she understand that no one was coming to save her? That the one person who was supposed to protect her was the same person who let her waste away? For 19 years, Delilah had lived in silence. She never spoke a word, never told her story. But now the world was listening. Her suffering had been hidden behind closed doors. But the truth? The truth was finally out in the open. And Crystal Canales, she was finally going to answer for what she had done. It's the question no one can stop asking. Could this have been prevented? The signs were there. The warnings. The red flags that now seem impossible to ignore. Delilah hadn't been to a doctor in years. No school records. No hospital visits. No one outside that house had seen her in nearly 3 years. And yet, no one came. Child Protective Services, mandatory reporters, the very people meant to protect the vulnerable. Where were they? There were no records of home visits. No welfare checks. No one had knocked on that door to ask if Delilah was okay. And what about family? Relatives had known Delilah was autistic. They had seen her before. So why did no one question it when she suddenly disappeared? Some said they assumed Crystal had things under control. Others admitted they felt something was wrong, but they didn't want to overstep. And that's the most painful truth of all. How many other Delilahs are out there? How many vulnerable people are suffering in silence, locked away behind closed doors? How many times have we turned a blind eye, thinking it's not our place to ask? For Delilah, it's too late. No one asked. No one came. And now she is gone. But the lesson she leaves behind, it can't be ignored. Delilah Villegas never got to tell her story. For 19 years she lived in silence. And in the end, the world only heard her voice when it was too late. So where is Crystal Canales now? She sits behind bars, waiting for the justice system to decide her fate. A mother who had every opportunity to protect her child, and instead, let her waste away. Prosecutors are building their case. Investigators are still piecing together the full picture. But one thing is certain, Delilah should still be alive. And now we have to ask ourselves, how do we stop this from happening again? How many more children, how many more vulnerable people, are suffering in silence right now? We tell ourselves we would step in, that we would notice the signs, that we would do something. But Delilah's story reminds us, neglect doesn't always scream for attention. Sometimes it hides. Sometimes it's just a quiet house, a closed door, a child no one sees. Justice for Delilah isn't just about putting Crystal Canales behind bars. It's about making sure no one else suffers the way she did. Because silence can be deadly. And no one should have to die just to be heard.